This is the beginning of a new age, gentlemen. Armed with this gauntlet, there is no way our enemy can surprise us.
I went into Evil West having really high hopes. It's a paranormal themed game set in the Wild West and something that's right up my alley, not to mention a genre we just don't get enough of. Plus it's also a game developed by Flying Wild Hog, developers of one of my favourite shooters of the year, Shadow Warrior 3. I was even confident despite the perspective shift with these guys going from making first person shooters to a third person one. And yet, I hate to say that my confidence was misplaced because Evil West is just a bit of a mess.
Nah, it's not that bad.
It's a complete hodgepodge of different ideas, mechanics and features that just don't gel properly, combined with unbalanced and repetitive combat and a storyline that could cure insomnia.
Yes, quite. Well, as I say, keep up the good work. God bless you all, and God bless America.
First problem with Evil West is that it's a story that just really hits the ground running and pumps you with details, throwing you right into the vampire hunting boots of Jesse, working for the Rentier Institute alongside his dad, and protecting the American frontier from the undead menace. The game opens with Jesse and his buddy Edgar trying to stop a train that's housing a vampire they're trying to get, and it's almost identical to the opening of another Wild West vampire-themed game called Darkwatch. A game way back on the Xbox about a secret society of hunters and cowboys, opening with a prologue set on a train involving a vampire and a bunch of undead creatures. But that's where the similarities end. From this point on, Evil West starts throwing characters, factions, and all these plot details at you without mercy, and I gotta be honest, it kinda turned me off the whole thing entirely. It has something to do with some kind of virus that's infecting humans and turning them into these weird slug-looking creatures, and there's a vampire faction that's trying to orchestrate the whole thing, but then the story just frequently goes off the rails and becomes downright confusing to follow.
That would explain why they attacked Baxter. They were protecting their source, the ancient blood they used to transform their familiars.
I didn't understand what you said.
Early on, the Institute gets attacked and Jesse's dad is gravely wounded, and a creepy little vampire girl, how original, becomes the main antagonist, I think. But then later on, they're literally talking about stock reports, accountants, and forensics.
Based on the final telegram from my forensic accountant, Andalusia's portfolio of holdings is stashed in a briefcase.
It's like I'm watching the Senate scenes from The Phantom Menace.
Will you defer your motion to allow a commission to explore the validity of your accusations?
There are frequent and lengthy cinematics in this game where characters all stand around and often try to banter with each other, and there's humour here that just misses the mark entirely.
Arrow can suck my dick.
It's just this really weird, aimless story taking you to the kind of locations that often feel about as far removed from a Western as you could possibly get. And it eventually got to the point, I'm sad to say, where I just started skipping all of these cinematics. And look, I'm not trying to be a dick and act like stories in a video game are bad, but it just really didn't captivate me or hold my interest.
Can't say, but it's 100% solid.
And it's not like I'm averse to storytelling. I mean, I actually sat through the entirety of Metal Gear Solid 4's epilogue.
Please, I need to concentrate.
What I think's even sadder is that you can genuinely tell here that this story is a labour of love for whoever came up with it. There's far too many specifics with character details and plot twists here for this to just be some phoned-in story that someone's come up with. I get the sense of this actually being a passion project when it comes to the writing. You know, as if someone really thought they had a good story to tell here.
He and his maniacal brat are up to their assholes in illegal acquisitions, and the government intends to seize their not insubstantial portfolio.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard.
Also too, I think for this kind of a game to be so heavy on the narrative and cinematics, I mean, it just doesn't fit with the DNA of these developers. And that kind of leads me on to my next point of how this game is really trying to be something that it's not.
There we go.
I've never played a lower budget game before that is so desperately trying to copy that AAA gameplay formula. And that's really, I think, what it seems Flying Wild Hog have tried to do here.
Hell yeah!
Right, so if you played any of those games from those major studios lately, most notably Sony exclusives, well then you're gonna know exactly what I'm talking about here. That being these kind of third-person games with a combination of melee and range combat sequences, where you kill a whole bunch of enemies, followed by these incredibly boring non-combat filler, where you're just navigating around an empty environment or solving some kind of puzzle. And by puzzles, I mean stuff like pushing around carts, over and over. On the off chance there's something else required, a lot of the time Jesse's just gonna outright say what the solution is too.
Can't make it without a rope.
And you have to do these tasks multiple times, so every time it comes up, you're going to instantly know what it expects you to do.
All done.
Outside of the puzzles, Jesse often just frequently talks to himself for no reason.
Almost there. Gotta get to that other switch.
Making these completely pointless comments on the current situation, which, again, is a pretty notable trait a lot of the protagonists have in all those Sony games.
Oh, shit. I can see why they don't get many tourists around here. Yeah, looks like I'm getting closer to its nest. Yet another mine.
When navigating the environment, it's almost always in a completely non-threatening manner. I mean, there's usually never any enemies, and getting across obstacles involves moving to these preset positions which are lit up like a goddamn Christmas tree, and then pressing the interact button essentially to just jump across gaps or pull yourself up ledges or climb ropes. Oh yeah, along with having to squeeze through tight gaps or shimmy along cliffs. How fun. All of which have absolutely zero chance of failing because they're little more than just scripted animations.
Oh shit.
You can't even drop down from a higher level in this game without standing in the right place beforehand. And it's like, when did the basic ability to just navigate an environment get thrown to the wayside? I mean, heaven forbid, man, the game gives the player the chance to potentially mess up here and fall to their death. But then again, you know, when it's something clearly influenced by the kind of games that people don't play to be challenged, well, then it all starts to make sense.
Ooh, didn't expect that in this damn jungle.
It's just so crazy to me how technology's advanced so far in video games, and yet something as simple as giving the player control over their movement has now become so limited. Top of that, you've got like this faux leveling up an XP system, which as far as I can tell is just for show. I mean, you'd assume the way this works is that you kill enemies, you earn XP, and you level up. Only, you have to kill every enemy to get to the next area. So it's not like you're going to be missing out on a bunch of enemies and all these experience points. That kind of leads me to believe that everyone playing this is going to level up at the same time, so it's not really an XP system, is it? Know what I mean? If the game is just leveling the player up automatically at key points. I mean, I think there might be occasional fights you can skip, but it's never more than just like a few stragglers, and certainly not like you're missing out on an entire level. You can choose which perks and upgrades you want to spend your points on and in what order, so that's pretty cool, but this XP interface is just kind of misleading. And I guess they thought they had to include it, seeing as all the games they're basing Evil West on had these XP systems to some extent. It's kind of funny too, I think, how they got Danny Trejo to do a promo for this thing, going on about how he just wants to play a game.
I just want to play a game!
You know, promoting the same game where you have to stare at the back of a train carriage half the time.
Enough!
So, yeah, if you're used to the gameplay loops in titles like God of War or The Last of Us, well, this is all going to seem very familiar.
This should work.
The thing is, and I can't believe I'm defending this, but in those other games, those moments of downtime actually had a purpose. I mean, for instance, in The Last of Us, those slower moments in between combat served as a means of building the relationship between Ellie and Joel through their interactions.
What was that all about?
These areas were also important because you could often go off and salvage lots of crucial items that you would need to craft weapons, plus it was also just a bit of a visual spectacle, you know, exploring these well-crafted and often gorgeous-looking locations. But when your game looks like shit, well, then it doesn't quite work the same, does it? And you know what, that's probably a good segue into talking about Evil West visuals. Now look man, I know you can't expect superb graphics for every single game that comes out, but I gotta say, I was actually shocked when I found out this is using Unreal Engine 4, only because I could have sworn it was using Unreal Engine 3. Yeah dog, Evil West is just not a very good looking game. Even on the so-called epic setting, it just has really crappy looking assets and often awful textures. There are some decent looking locations here and there. In fact, you know, this bit right here is the best looking area in the entire game. Otherwise, it just often doesn't look very good. What I think's kind of funny too is how Jesse always has this weird sort of rim lighting effect going on. Like I've got some kind of Elder Scrolls Oblivion buff active or something. And the execution animations in this thing are just absolutely laughable at times. I think the pre-rendered cinematics look decent though, and to be honest, that's the kind of thing you would have expected to see in the game, not this.
Keep moving!
it really does look last gen. In fact, it's actually kind of sad. And how this is only able to achieve 30 frames per second on the console versions in the so-called quality mode is insulting. So I guess my point is when the areas in the game look this crappy, have no production value and nothing to offer outside of pointless cosmetics or brain-dead puzzles, well then all of this stuff in between the combat is really just filler. And it's kind of like walking through an art gallery, but all the paintings are smeared with Vaseline. Now, Flying Wild Hog did do a similar thing with Shadow Warrior 3, combining the combat loop with the slower exploration-based moments, but I mean, even in that instance, it served an actual purpose. It offered up platforming as a means to balance out those intense combat sequences, plus it also built upon the dynamic between Lo Wang and Hoji, as these guys would constantly be bantering back and forth.
That's all it took?
Magic, baby!
In Evil West, you'll find chests or small bags of gold off the beaten path, but that's about it. And it's kind of like they knew they had to put something in between all of this combat, only they didn't know what that was supposed to be or how to properly do it. Plus, finally, like a lot of all those AAA games, Evil West just drags on and on to the point that it really starts to become bloated and just unnecessarily long. I genuinely can't think of the last time I played a game that overstayed its welcome this much, and even though I was skipping every single cinematic by about the halfway mark, the whole thing still ran upwards of 10 hours. For something that's so linear, that really is about 2 to 3 hours longer than it needs to be. Kept coming to these points in the story when I thought that things were starting to wrap up, but then another mission begins and it's like a whole new chapter's just begun. I think the campaign might have had some merit as a 5 or 6 hour long game because it does have replay value with the New Game Plus mode, but it's just like this endless series of levels that doesn't ever really seem to get any better. And all it does is just throw more enemies at you in a lame attempt to increase the challenge, which brings us onto the combat. So combat's broken down into using ranged weapons, of which you've got Jesse's repeating rifle, a revolver, shotgun, flamethrower, explosives, and eventually a Gatling gun. The repeating rifle and the revolver are reloaded automatically, because yeah, imagine giving the player the option to manually reload a weapon. And then the shotgun, the explosives, the flamethrower, and the Gatling gun all have a cooldown time, which for the latter can be upwards of 5 minutes. It's like imagine using the super shotgun in Doom, then having to wait 30 seconds before you can fire it again. As for the Gatling gun, well, that thing is like an insult to Gatling guns everywhere. And yeah, I know they're not exactly the pinnacle of precision when it comes to firearms, but certainly it's not like shooting a sprinkler at someone either. I don't think the flamethrower is all that good either. It's mostly just used for burning through cobwebs that block your path, which are again these very preset interactions. I mean, you can't even burn all of these spiders you see on the ground, for instance. It's just this incredibly static weapon that has like 1 or 2 basic functions.
Silly bitch, your weapons cannot harm me. Don't you know who the fuck I am?
Overall, I think the cooldown times just really ruin how intense and fast-paced the combat could have been. Spending gold on weapon upgrades seems enticing, but it's just these incremental upgrades to these weapons and it doesn't really change them in a fundamental way. As for the melee, well, on Jesse's right hand you've got the gauntlet, a steel fist used for basic melee attacks. You've got a simple combo achieved by just mashing the attack button over and over, along with uppercutting enemies up into the air to then hit them into nearby objects. Or set them up for air juggling with the revolver, which I have to admit is pretty damn cool. Then on top of that, on your left hand, you've got the Zapper, which aside from being the only means of blocking incoming attacks, can be used for either dashing into or pulling enemies towards you, stunning them with electricity and again leaving them open to combos or uppercuts. And then the attacks that you can't block with the Zapper can just be outright avoided or be interrupted with a kick move. When you start putting skill points into upgrading all this stuff, well, there are some pretty cool abilities you start to get. Like being able to slam enemies into the ground with the Zapper after an uppercut doing like basic AoE damage, or stunning a group of enemies at once when you pull them in with the dash. When you upgrade the explosives, it turns it into this mini tornado, which again I have to admit is pretty awesome. And another item called the Crippling Rod can also stun everything in the area with an AoE blast. Yeah, son, once you get to your 30s, you'll come across something called Crippling Debt. The Crippling Rod is kind of like that, except that it doesn't last as long. Some enemies have these glowing circles pop up before certain attacks, what the game calls weak spots, and hitting these weak spots along with executing enemies is the main way of getting your health back, outside of Jesse's healing ability. So it does at least encourage you to engage with all of these mechanics. If it's all sounding like a lot of stuff to deal with, the reason is that it is. To the point, I think, that it kind of feels like they just added in maybe 2 or 3 more mechanics than they really needed. Like there's a crossbow, for instance, which is really just a weaker version of the rifle. And outside of a couple of puzzles, I'd argue is just completely pointless. Once you've unlocked all of these items, you can see them visually on Jesse's character model, and the whole thing just looks ridiculous. Reminds me of Risk of Rain 2 when you had like a bazillion artifacts and your character was covered from head to toe in these things, only in that game that was done ironically. Here though, it just looks kind of stupid. I mean, he looks like a walking junk pile, with everything shifting around constantly and his movement somehow unhindered despite walking around with this giant arsenal. Either way though, on paper, I'm sure this all sounds mechanically fine. But the problem is that there just doesn't seem to be any real thought put into these arenas outside of them just being these giant circular areas where you're often bombarded with so many enemies at once that trying to pull off these more elaborate combos is pointless, not to mention dangerous. The lack of any kind of combo or style meter means there's no incentive to be more creative here, along with lacking something like bonus XP, so there's really no reason to be that clever with killing, and simply cheesing enemies is far more effective. The best decision I made when playing this was dropping the game from hard mode back to normal, because hard mode, despite its namesake, doesn't actually make the game harder. It just gives the enemies way more health points, which makes it even more tedious to wade through them. So when I dropped it back to normal, I didn't change my strategy. The only thing it changed was the amount of time I was wasting trying to kill them. Ranged enemies are going to hang back and shoot at you from a distance, and the only real way to deal with these guys is to wait for them to reveal their weak spot and then shoot it with the rifle. So it's this constant loop of dealing with those guys first and then focusing on the melee enemies, and playing on normal, hard or evil mode ain't going to change that. And then once you reach a certain point in the campaign, all of that just becomes completely redundant and the focus of the combat shifts entirely. Now, Evil West has a lot of boss fights, and although I don't play a lot of FromSoft games, if I had to describe these fights with my limited knowledge, I'd say they're like FromSoft bosses, only done horribly. Bosses obviously have a high health pool and dish out a lot of damage, so it's all about learning those 2 or 3 attack moves along with blocking or evading at just the right time. And that'll be fine, but the thing is, the boss fights are rarely one-off encounters, because once you've fought a boss for the first time, well, you can expect to see it for the rest of the game. You know, just flat out recycled like an empty carton of milk. Early on in the campaign here, you fight this giant bat gargoyle looking thing, and you're going to see this guy in particular almost a dozen times throughout the rest of the campaign. In fact, at some points you're fighting 2 or 3 of them at once. There's a boss that shoots out web attacks, making your movement slower. You'll see this guy again countless times. And another one which is kind of like a floating hive, which, yeah, again, you'll come up against a whole heap too. I think I hate this guy the most because he has this like annoying effect of being able to shield nearby enemies, protecting them from damage. So not only do you have to take this guy out first, which is this annoying process of shooting the hives that surround it, then rushing in to attack it when it's stunned, multiple times, but also evade every nearby enemy while you're doing this, most of which happen to be other bosses who also happen to be impervious to your attacks. Are you starting to see where I'm going with this? How crappy this all starts to become here? I mean, the whole thing's fried my brain so much, man, that I can't even think up any of my trademark witty insults towards your mum. It's made my brain sick. It's made me sick! And it's not like they've added any more tricks to it, it's just the same bosses you've already beaten over and over and over again. It's like going to school and sitting for a test that you've already passed. I mean, it basically turns the combat into filler. And it's just such dated design too, and the way that you run into these giant circular arenas and know that as soon as you set foot on the ground that a fight's going to start. Reminds me of playing cover shooters from like a decade ago when you'd enter a new room and you'd see a whole bunch of waist-high objects everywhere and you just knew that enemies were about to spawn in. Only that kind of design was excusable because that was 10 fucking years ago. It's also with these mini-boss enemies where the combat ultimately starts to break down, because these guys are too tough and strong and they resist most of your basic attacks. There's a meter around their health bar which when full is supposed to allow you to stun them with the dash move, but this takes far too long to build up and it doesn't do enough damage to be all that useful. So what are you supposed to do? Yeah, what do you do when everything you've just gotten used to for the past 2 to 3 hours suddenly has no effect on the enemies who now form the majority of each combat sequence? Well, I'll tell you what you're supposed to do, and that's to make use of this supercharged ability. Right, so around the time you finish the first act or so, after a couple of hours, you unlock the ability to supercharge, and this is where you charge up 3 energy bars and then you can teleport all around the place, dealing high damage to enemies and becoming pretty much unstoppable for a few seconds. The catch though is that this has to be charged up first, and how do you do that? Well, I'm so glad you asked. To do that, you can find pickups around the levels, plus there's also perks to unlock that make it so enemies killed when electrified drop pickups. And the idea, I guess, is to farm these basic enemies for that resource. Kinda like using the fodder enemies in Doom Eternal to get back your armor and ammo. What this means though is that from this point on, it just becomes a loop of using whatever method you can to earn your energy as fast as possible. Now for me, that involved dash pulling enemies into me and then just using their stomachs as a speed bag until they died and dropped energy. Obviously I have to do this a few times because the enemies are so spongy, but then when it was finally charged, I'd focus on the mini-boss enemies and try to finish them off, before then going back to charging up my energy bar again. Where they completely fuck it up though is when they start to put you in these arenas, but then don't give you these basic enemies to utilize for these energy pickups. So instead what you need to do is essentially beat down 3 or 4 bosses at once. That's just awful. Now, if the cooldowns for all your weapons weren't so fucking long, this might have actually been a really fun third-person shooter, where you could have utilized fast weapon swapping to maximize damage. But instead I got a game where I have to wait 5 minutes before I can use my Gatling gun again. Just as the feeling of being a really dated PlayStation 3 or Xbox 360 title, back when a game would have like 1 or 2 ideas for how combat should work, and would just repeat the same thing over and over for an entire game. Having said that, I feel like that's almost an insult to those kind of games, because at least back then it was still kind of fun to play through. Getting through the combat in Evil West just feels like a chore. And it just feels like there's never any sense of thought put into the combination of all these enemies you're fighting at any one time. I mean, there's one point where you've got to deal with one of those hive bosses on the ground, along with a guy armed with a big ass shield, but then on the rooftop adjacent, there's another one out of reach spitting out webs at me the entire time. The hive guy protects the shield guy from taking damage, and the web guy covers the arena in web which slows down my movement speed. Oh yeah, and the game also periodically spawns in kamikaze enemies throughout the fight too. It's just like, who the hell thought this encounter would be fun? Yeah, don't get me started on the other boss fights. I mean, the fight against this giant tentacle monster is one of the absolute worst things ever made by another human being. And the final boss is the kind of thing that makes you really question your life choices.
Nah, it's not that bad.
And it really could have been fun and challenging sequences if they fine-tuned the combination of enemies, but the whole thing just feels so willy-nilly. It's the definition of flinging shit at a wall and hoping something sticks. Lastly, Evil West does have a co-op mode, and that is exactly what you'd expect for a half-baked, tacked-on multiplayer component. That being glitchy, laggy, and something that comes across as a complete afterthought. I mean, for starters, how about the fact this mode doesn't share story progress? So whoever hosts is the only person whose progress is saved. This mode buffs up the health points for all the enemies, making them even spongier, and for all those exciting scripted sequences, only one person gets to play them, while the other one, I guess, just stands back and twiddles their thumbs. So yeah, man, keep that in mind if you and your friend are going to pick this one up and try to play through it. Also, keep that in mind, I designed this rhyme to remind myself how I tried so hard to like this game.
We both kicked him at the same time. What are you doing?
You'd think they might let the second person play as Edgar, that eye patch wearing badass who shows up alongside Jesse throughout the main game, only instead of that, it's just another person playing as Jesse. It's like they couldn't even be bothered making a separate character model. There is definitely fun to be had in this mode though, laughing at all the busted shit you're gonna see, but co-op really feels again like it's had no effort put into it whatsoever, outside of the basics of being able to connect to someone else's save file. It's the final nail in the coffin of laziness that is Evil West's credibility. So overall, Evil West is just a huge disappointment. I had really high hopes after Shadow Warrior 3 that Flying Wild Hog could keep riding that high. What I got instead though was a game that took me to some new lows. It's genuinely one of the few times I almost threw in the towel here and thought about not bothering to finish the game at all. I considered almost making that a focus point for my review, in the fact that out of the 8 or so years that I've been doing this, the whole thing was so bad to me that I almost couldn't bring myself to beat it, out of it just being so repetitive and tedious and never ending. I don't think updates or patches are going to fix any of this stuff either. I mean, it's just not a very good game, fam. The price tag and the busted co-op mode might attract some people, but I think the unbalanced, sloppy gameplay is sure to quickly scare them off. Thankfully, this month and the next, we're going to be spoiled with other games, most of which are going to be pretty good. So my advice for this one, partner, is to wait until high noon, and then put a bullet between the eyes as to the premise of ever playing this thing to begin with.
Arrow can suck my dick.